After 20 years in law enforcement, 15 of those years spent riding my police motorcycle through the county roads enforcing the law, I finally found what I had been searching for: peace and quiet. Maple Ridge Estate seemed perfect when I first drove through its tree-lined streets. The houses were not extravagant but well-maintained, with spacious yards and friendly-looking neighbors. I had saved every extra penny from my county sheriff's salary to afford this modest three-bedroom home with the large oak tree in the front yard. The moving truck pulled away, leaving me alone with my boxes and furniture scattered across the living room. Through the front window, golden afternoon light filtered in, catching dust particles in its beam. This was mine. No more apartment living. No more sharing walls with strangers. Just me, my home, and the quiet suburban life I had craved after years of sirens and emergencies. I spent that first day unpacking essentials and setting up my bedroom. The previous owners had left the place spotless, and I appreciated not having to deep clean before settling in. The kitchen was small but functional with new appliances. The backyard featured a wooden deck perfect for summer barbecues if I ever made friends in the neighborhood. The crown jewel of my possessions arrived last: my personal police motorcycle. Not a county-issued vehicle, but my own custom Harley that I had purchased after my promotion to county sheriff 5 years ago. The black and chrome gleamed in the sunlight as I carefully backed it into the driveway. This bike represented everything I had worked for in my career. Every extra shift, every holiday spent on duty instead of with family. It was more than transportation. It was a symbol of my identity. That evening, a knock at the door revealed a middle-aged woman with a practiced smile holding a wicker basket. "Welcome to Maple Ridge. I am Janet from 3 doors down," she said, handing me the basket filled with local treats and several official-looking folders. "Inside you will find all the information about our homeowners association. The monthly fees are very reasonable, and we have meetings every first Tuesday." I thanked her for the basket and placed the HOA materials on the kitchen counter without much thought. In my experience, HOAs were optional in most communities, and I had no interest in joining one. I had purchased this home to escape rules and regulations when off duty, not to submit to more of them. My first weekend in the house passed peacefully. I assembled furniture, hung pictures, and enjoyed takeout from local restaurants. On Sunday, I polished my motorcycle in the driveway, appreciating the quiet neighborhood sounds: birds chirping, distant lawnmowers, children playing several houses down. This was exactly what I had hoped for. Monday morning brought an unexpected surprise. A white envelope had been slipped under my front door overnight. Inside was a typed note: "All Maple Ridge homeowners are expected to maintain compliance with community standards. Please review the enclosed HOA guidelines and submit your membership application within 7 days." There was no signature, just the Maple Ridge Estates logo at the bottom. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling bin. If they wanted to talk about community standards, they could speak to me directly like adults, not leave anonymous notes like teenagers. Besides, I had reviewed my closing documents carefully. There was no mandatory HOA membership clause in my deed or contract. I had specifically checked for that before purchasing. Little did I know that this discarded note would be the first salvo in a neighborhood war that would escalate beyond anything I could have imagined. My sanctuary was about to become a battleground, and my cherished motorcycle would be at the center of it all. 3 days after moving in, I was enjoying my morning coffee on the front porch when a luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. A woman emerged wearing designer sunglasses and a perfectly pressed pantsuit despite the early hour. Her blonde hair was styled in the quintessential "Can I speak to the manager?" cut that I had seen countless times in my law enforcement career. usually attached to the most difficult civilians we encountered. She approached with a clipboard in hand and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Good morning. I am Karen Whitfield, president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I do not believe we have had the pleasure of meeting properly." Her voice carried the artificial sweetness of someone accustomed to getting her way through a veneer of politeness. I stood and extended my hand. "James Miller, I moved in last week." She barely touched my hand before launching into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. "We are so thrilled to have new neighbors in our carefully maintained community. I noticed you have not yet submitted your HOA registration forms or paid your initial membership fee. The deadline is approaching, and we would hate to see any compliance issues so early in your residency." I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding. "Thank you for your concern, Ms. Whitfield, but I have reviewed my property documents carefully. There is no binding HOA covenant attached to this property. Membership appears to be voluntary, and I have chosen not to join at this time." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "There must be some misunderstanding. All homes in Maple Ridge Estates are part of the HOA. It is mandatory for community cohesion and property value protection. I understand that is what you believe, but legally speaking, that is not correct for my property. The previous owner was not a member, and there was no requirement for me to join upon purchase." Karen's gaze shifted to my motorcycle parked prominently in the driveway. Her nose wrinkled slightly as if she had detected an unpleasant odor. "Speaking of compliance issues, commercial vehicles are not permitted to be stored visibly on properties within Maple Ridge. That police motorcycle will need to be garaged or removed." I felt the first stirrings of annoyance but kept my voice level. "This is not a commercial vehicle. It is my personal motorcycle that I have owned for years. And again, as I am not subject to HOA rules, the point is moot." "Mr. Miller, perhaps you do not understand how things work here. Our community standards are what keep property values high and the neighborhood desirable. That motorcycle is an eyesore that neighbors have already complained about." "Complained? I have been here less than a week." I gestured around at my neatly maintained property. "There is nothing to complain about. My home and property are well within any reasonable community standard." Karen's artificial smile disappeared completely. "Let me be perfectly clear. Things run smoothly here when everyone follows the rules. The HOA board has significant authority in this neighborhood, and we exercise it when necessary. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position on both the membership and that vehicle." As she walked back to her SUV, she turned and added, "You have until the end of the week to comply, or you will face escalating consequences. We do not make exceptions." I watched her drive away, my peaceful morning thoroughly disrupted. I had dealt with power-hungry individuals throughout my career in law enforcement. Karen Whitfield was textbook, someone who had found a small pond in which to be a big fish and wielded that authority with excessive zeal. By that afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. A young couple walking their dog crossed the street rather than pass directly by my house. An elderly man retrieving his mail gave me a sympathetic but nervous glance before hurrying back inside. I was being branded as the neighborhood troublemaker for standing my ground against unreasonable demands. The next morning, a note was taped to my front door citing lawn height violations, though I had mowed just 2 days earlier. The day after brought a complaint about unapproved exterior fixtures regarding a standard security light I had installed beside the garage. Each notice was signed by Karen as HOA president, each more passive-aggressive than the last. My motorcycle became the focal point of their harassment. Additional notices claimed it violated noise ordinances, despite rarely being started early or late, took up too much driveway space, and projected an inappropriate image for the family-oriented community. What had begun as minor annoyance was rapidly becoming an organized campaign of harassment. I had faced down armed suspects with less determination than Karen Whitfield displayed in her crusade against my independence and my motorcycle. But if she thought I would fold easily, she had chosen the wrong neighbor to intimidate. After 2 weeks of living in my new home, I returned from grocery shopping to find my front door plastered with violation notices. Each was printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, though I knew the organization had no legal authority over me. Unapproved vehicle storage, excessive noise, improper lawn maintenance, unauthorized exterior modifications. The papers fluttered in the breeze like some bizarre decoration. I tore them down one by one, my frustration mounting with each notice. Inside, I spread them across my kitchen table and examined them closely. Each complaint was more ridiculous than the last. The motorcycle was cited as a commercial law enforcement vehicle, despite being my personal property with no county markings. My grass was allegedly 0.25 inches above regulation height. My porch light was excessively bright and non-compliant with neighborhood aesthetic standards. My law enforcement training kicked in. This was no longer about petty neighborhood politics. This was targeted harassment. I opened my laptop and began researching HOA laws in our state. After several hours of digging through legal websites and property statutes, my suspicions were confirmed. The Maple Ridge HOA had no binding authority over non-member properties. Their covenant had not been properly filed with the county when the development was established 20 years ago, making membership truly voluntary despite what they told residents. I printed the relevant legal codes and statutes, highlighting the sections that protected my rights as a property owner. If Karen wanted a legal battle, I was more than prepared to educate her on the limits of her authority. The next day brought an unexpected ally. A timid knock at my door revealed a nervous-looking man in his 60s. "Name is Frank," he said quietly, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "I live 4 houses down. Wanted to warn you about the HOA. They are ruthless with people who stand up to them." I invited Frank inside, and over coffee, he shared horror stories of the HOA's reign of terror. Elderly homeowners bullied into expensive, unnecessary improvements. Families fined hundreds of dollars for minor infractions like leaving trash cans out an hour too long. One family had even been driven to sell their home at a loss after Karen orchestrated a campaign of daily complaints and harassment. When they refused to remove a small memorial garden for their deceased child that violated the approved plantings list. "You are not the first to challenge them," Frank explained. "But most folks eventually give in. Karen and her board members have made people's lives unbearable. They have connections with local contractors, real estate agents, even some folks at City Hall. They know how to apply pressure." By the end of the week, 3 more neighbors had secretly approached me with similar warnings and their own HOA nightmare stories. Each expressed support for my stance but feared retaliation if they publicly sided with me. Their fear was palpable and disturbing. This was supposed to be a peaceful suburban neighborhood, not a dictatorship ruled by fear. One evening, I noticed a car driving slowly past my house multiple times. The next night, I spotted shadowy figures near my property line after dark. My law enforcement instincts triggered. I installed a comprehensive security camera system covering every approach to my house and garage, with special attention to the driveway where my motorcycle was parked. If anyone was planning something beyond harassment, they would be recorded in high definition. The following Tuesday, I received an anonymous text from a neighbor informing me that Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting about the problematic new resident undermining community standards. The neighbor reported that Karen had spent 45 minutes painting me as a dangerous rebel, threatening property values and neighborhood safety. She had even shown photos of my motorcycle taken from different angles, claiming it leaked oil. It did not, and attracted unsavory visitors to our community. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from Maple Ridge Estate's legal department, which I discovered was simply Karen's husband, a real estate attorney. The letter threatened legal action for continued noncompliance with community standards and demanded immediate HOA registration and removal of the commercial vehicle from visible property areas. I placed the letter in a growing file of harassment documentation. If they were escalating to legal threats, I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. What concerned me most was not the empty threats, but the increasingly bold surveillance of my property. The security cameras had captured multiple instances of people photographing my home and motorcycle from the sidewalk or slow-moving vehicles. That night, I received a call from the county dispatch. A major multi-vehicle accident on the highway required all available officers, including the sheriff. As I changed into my uniform, I made sure the security system was fully armed and recording. Something told me to be extra cautious, so I checked that all motion alerts were set to forward directly to my phone. Little did I know that this emergency call would be the opportunity my adversaries had been waiting for. My absence would create the perfect window for them to move from harassment to something far more sinister. As I drove toward the accident scene, the neighborhood I had hoped would be my sanctuary was about to become a crime scene. The highway accident scene was chaos when I arrived. 3 vehicles involved, injuries, a fuel leak, and traffic backed up for miles. As county sheriff, I needed to coordinate emergency services, manage the scene, and ensure proper protocol was followed for what would clearly be a lengthy investigation. Rain had begun to fall, complicating the entire operation and ensuring I would be away from home all night. Around 2:00 a.m., in the midst of overseeing the accident cleanup, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Then again, and again. Motion alerts from my home security system. I could not step away to check them properly. Lives and safety depended on my presence at the scene. I silenced the notifications, planning to review them once the situation was under control. What I did not know then was that the cameras were capturing footage that would change everything. The security video, which I would watch later with cold fury, showed 5 figures approaching my house under the cover of darkness and pouring rain. Karen Whitfield led the group, unmistakable even with a hooded raincoat partially obscuring her face. The others were all HOA board members I had seen at a distance but never spoken with. Robert Chambers, the treasurer, Linda Martinez, the secretary, Thomas Wilson and Jennifer Brooks, both committee heads. They moved with the awkward stealth of people unaccustomed to clandestine activities, carrying bags and containers. The timestamp showed 1:58 a.m. as they gathered around my motorcycle in the driveway. Karen directed the others with pointed gestures, her voice occasionally rising above the rain in phrases captured by the microphone. Teach him about compliance, and should have followed the rules. Robert removed bottles from his bag and began pouring what appeared to be some type of chemical over the motorcycle seat and tank. The liquid gleamed in the security light, eating through the custom paint job immediately. Linda and Jennifer applied more chemicals to the chrome parts, the caustic substances visibly corroding the metal on contact. Thomas Wilson, a heavy-set man with thinning hair, seemed the most nervous, repeatedly looking around as though expecting to be caught. "This is going too far," he said, voice clearly captured by the camera. "Damaging property is illegal." Karen's response was immediate and harsh. "Do not be weak, Thomas. He has been warned repeatedly. Sometimes people need to learn respect for authority the hard way." What happened next crossed the line from vandalism to something far more destructive. Thomas, perhaps trying to prove his loyalty after being chastised, pulled out a small container. "This will really teach him a lesson," he declared, splashing additional liquid over the areas already doused in chemicals. "What is that?" Karen asked, taking a step back. "Just a little something to make sure the message is clear," Thomas replied. Before anyone could stop him, he struck a match and tossed it onto the motorcycle. The chemical accelerant ignited instantly. What was planned as vandalism erupted into a full-blown fire, flames leaping higher than any of them had anticipated. The sudden whoosh and intense heat sent all five scrambling backward in panic. "You idiot," Karen hissed. "This was supposed to be a warning, not arson." The fire grew quickly, consuming the motorcycle and threatening to spread to the house. For a moment the group stood frozen in horror at what they had unleashed. Then Karen's authoritative voice cut through their panic. "We need to leave. Now, all of you go home different ways. This never happened." They scattered like frightened animals, running to their vehicles parked around the corner or fleeing on foot into the rainy night. Not one of them attempted to extinguish the fire or call emergency services. The camera captured their retreat as the motorcycle continued to burn in my driveway. A neighbor across the street, awakened by the commotion, finally called the fire department. By the time firefighters arrived, the motorcycle was beyond saving, and heat damage had begun to affect the exterior of my garage. At 4:30 a.m., with the highway accident scene finally cleared, I returned home exhausted from hours of demanding work. The smell hit me first, the acrid tang of burnt metal, rubber, and chemicals. Then the flashing lights of a fire marshal's vehicle still parked in front of my house. As I pulled in, the full devastation came into view. My motorcycle, my pride and joy for 15 years, was unrecognizable. The custom leather seat was gone. The chrome was blackened and warped. The frame stood like the skeleton of some mechanical creature, stripped of its dignity and purpose. Puddles of rainwater mixed with chemical residue created toxic rainbows around what remained. The fire marshal approached as I exited my vehicle, still wearing my county sheriff uniform. "Appears to be deliberate, Sheriff Miller," he said, recognizing me immediately. "Multiple accelerants used. We have collected samples for the lab. You have any enemies you know of?" I stood in the rain, water soaking through my uniform as I stared at the destruction. "I do now," I answered, my voice level despite the rage building inside me. "And I know exactly who they are." The security camera footage would prove to be their undoing. Every face clearly visible. Every action documented in high definition. Every word recorded by the system I had installed specifically because I sensed escalating danger. What had begun as a neighborhood dispute over an HOA had culminated in a criminal act of destruction caught on camera from multiple angles. As dawn broke over the charred remains of my motorcycle, I made a decision. The time for polite resistance was over. Karen Whitfield and her HOA cronies had just committed multiple felonies on the property of the county sheriff. Their campaign of intimidation had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. They had chosen the wrong person to target, and now they would face the full consequences of their actions. The morning after the fire, I sat in my living room surrounded by printed still images from the security footage. Each frame clearly showed the faces of all 5 participants. I had created a timeline of events with timestamps and transcriptions of their recorded conversations. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. For the first time since moving in, I opened my bedroom closet and reached for the garment bag at the back. Inside hung my full county sheriff dress uniform, pressed and ready. I had intentionally kept my profession private from my neighbors, not out of secrecy, but from a desire to separate my work and home lives. That separation was no longer possible or desirable. I dressed methodically, each button and badge a reminder of my oath to uphold the law. The gold star-shaped badge gleamed as I pinned it to my chest. The uniform transformed not just my appearance but my demeanor. I was no longer just James Miller, homeowner. I was Sheriff James Miller, the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the county. My phone rang. It was Deputy Chen, one of my most trusted officers. "Got your message, Sheriff. I pulled the files you requested. The HOA is not legally registered with the county as a binding covenant. They have been operating on intimidation and misinformation for years. I also ran background checks on all 5 suspects." "Anything significant?" I asked, adjusting my tie in the mirror. "Karen Whitfield has 2 prior complaints for harassment filed by former neighbors, both dropped when the homeowners moved away. Robert Chambers had a financial fraud charge 10 years ago that was settled out of court. The others are clean. I have assembled the team you requested. We will meet you at the community center at 7:00 p.m. Throughout the day, neighbors who had secretly supported me began coming forward. Frank brought coffee and expressed outrage at what had happened. A young couple from down the street provided additional video from their doorbell camera showing the suspects' vehicles arriving and leaving. An elderly woman brought me homemade bread and whispered that she had documentation of HOA financial irregularities going back 5 years. The pieces were falling into place. What had begun as harassment against me had opened the floodgates of community grievances. Years of intimidation and fear were giving way to solidarity and a desire for justice. At 6:30 p.m., I received a text message from one of my secret allies in the neighborhood. "Victory party starting at community center. Karen celebrating resolution of the motorcycle problem. All board members present." The timing could not have been more perfect. Karen had unwittingly gathered all the perpetrators in one location for what she believed would be a celebration of their triumph. Instead, it would become the scene of their downfall. At precisely 7:00 p.m., I parked my county sheriff vehicle directly in front of the community center entrance. Deputy Chen and 3 other uniformed officers stood at attention as I approached. Inside, through the windows, I could see Karen raising a champagne glass in toast, the other board members clustered around her. I straightened my uniform one final time and nodded to my deputies. "By the book," I instructed them. "Professional and by the book." The room fell silent as we entered. Karen stood frozen mid-toast, her champagne glass suspended in the air. The other board members displayed various expressions of shock and dawning horror as they recognized me in uniform. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the room of approximately 30 residents, "I am Sheriff James Miller, County Sheriff's Department. Some of you know me as your new neighbor in House 1542. Others know me as the owner of the motorcycle that was criminally destroyed last night." Karen's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. No one moved to clean it up. The only sound in the room was the slow drip of champagne from the table onto the puddle below. I approached the front of the room, standing directly before Karen and the board members. Karen Whitfield, Robert Chambers, Linda Martinez, Thomas Wilson, and Jennifer Brooks, you are all being charged with criminal trespassing, vandalism, destruction of property, and arson. We have video evidence of your actions and your conversatio. NS during the commission of these crimes. Deputy Chen began distributing the formal charging documents to each stunned board member. Thomas Wilson immediately began sobbing, while Robert Chambers turned pale and reached for a chair to steady himself. Karen, however, attempted to maintain her authority. "You cannot do this," she whispered, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "We are the HOA. We were enforcing community standards." I leaned in slightly, meeting her gaze directly. "I am not doing this as your neighbor, Ms. Whitfield. I am doing this as the law. The HOA has been operating without legal authority. Your actions last night were not enforcement of anything except your own desire for control, and they crossed the line into multiple felonies." The room erupted in murmurs as this information spread. Years of fear and compliance based on lies began to unravel in real time. "Officers, please escort these individuals outside for processing," I instructed my deputies. As they moved to comply, I addressed the remaining neighbors. "For those of you who have suffered under the illegal authority of this organization, my office will be taking statements regarding any additional abuses or financial irregularities. The reign of intimidation in Maple Ridge Estates ends tonight." As Karen was led past me toward the door, her carefully maintained facade finally cracked. "This is not over," she hissed. I simply nodded. "You are right about that, Ms. Whitfield. The legal proceedings are just beginning." The community center doors closed behind the arrested board members, leaving a room full of neighbors looking at me with a mixture of shock, relief, and newfound respect. The neighborhood would never be the same again, and that was precisely the point. The county courthouse stood imposing against the morning sky as I climbed the steps in my formal uniform. Today was not about me as the victim, but about me as the chief law enforcement officer overseeing justice. I had assigned the case to our most experienced prosecutor, while ensuring proper protocols were followed to prevent any claims of conflict of interest. Inside the courtroom, Karen Whitfield and her 4 co-defendants sat with their attorneys. Their appearances had changed dramatically in the weeks since their arrests. Gone were the designer clothes and confident postures. Karen's perfectly maintained hairstyle had given way to a simpler, less polished look. The others appeared equally diminished, shoulders hunched as though trying to become invisible. Judge Eleanor Santiago entered, and the proceedings began. The prosecution presented the evidence methodically. The security footage played on screens for all to see. Forensic reports confirming the accelerants used matched the residue on the defendant's clothing, and financial records showing HOA funds had been used to purchase the chemicals. Thomas Wilson was the first to break. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify against the others. His tearful confession confirmed what many had suspected: the HOA had been operating without legal authority for years, using intimidation and misinformation to control the neighborhood and collect fees that often went to questionable expenses. Karen told us the sheriff, I mean Mr. Miller, was threatening the neighborhood's property values, Thomas testified, unable to meet anyone's eye. She said making an example of him would prevent others from challenging the HOA. It was supposed to be just damage to the motorcycle paint, but things got out of hand. As the trial progressed, more neighbors came forward with testimonies of their own HOA horror stories. An independent audit of the HOA finances revealed years of mismanagement. Funds collected for community improvements had instead gone to personal expenses for board members, including Karen's luxury SUV, listed in the books as a community patrol vehicle. Local media covered the story extensively. What had begun as a neighborhood dispute bloomed into a county-wide examination of HOA practices and rights. Other communities began questioning their own associations, demanding transparency and accountability. Through it all, I maintained professional detachment, allowing the justice system to work as it should. When called to testify, I spoke only of the facts, avoiding emotional language despite the personal nature of the crime. My deputies later told me this calm professionalism made the case even more compelling. After 3 days of testimony and evidence, Judge Santiago delivered her verdict. All 5 defendants were found guilty, though with varying degrees of culpability. Karen Whitfield, as the ringleader, received the harshest sentence: financial restitution for the destroyed motorcycle valued at $45,000, $300 hours of community service, and 2 years of probation with a permanent criminal record. Ms. Whitfield, Judge Santiago stated during sentencing, "Your actions represent an egregious abuse of perceived authority. You fostered a climate of fear and intimidation in your community and ultimately orchestrated criminal acts of vandalism and arson. That no one was physically harmed is merely fortunate timing." The others received similar though slightly reduced sentences, with Thomas Wilson's cooperation earning him the lightest punishment. All were prohibited from serving in any HOA or community organization leadership position for life. As the defendants were led from the courtroom, the remaining Maple Ridge residents gathered outside broke into spontaneous applause. The sense of relief was palpable. Many approached me with thanks and apologies for not standing up sooner. Frank, my first ally in the neighborhood, shook my hand vigorously. "You did more than get justice for your motorcycle, Sheriff. You liberated an entire community from years of petty tyranny." In the weeks that followed, investigators uncovered even more financial improprieties. The HOA had been collecting fees far above what was needed for actual community maintenance, with the excess often funding personal expenses for board members. Legal notices were sent to all residents explaining that the HOA had never been properly registered and had been operating without legitimate authority. The most satisfying image came 2 weeks after the trial, captured by a local news photographer. Karen Whitfield, dressed in an orange community service vest, picking up trash along the county highway. Her designer sunglasses replaced by standard-issue safety glasses, her manicured hands covered by work gloves. The photo ran in the county paper with the caption, "Former HOA President serves community in a different way." The justice was not about humiliation but accountability. These were not hardened criminals but ordinary people who had become intoxicated by power and control. Their punishment was designed to be rehabilitative while sending a clear message: no one stands above the law, and position or perceived authority does not grant immunity from consequences. As spring approached, the neighborhood began physical and social reconstruction. The illegal HOA was formally dissolved by court order. In its place, residents started discussing a voluntary community association with transparent practices and democratic processes. And I found myself, somewhat reluctantly but with a sense of duty, at the center of this transformation. The first true spring day in Maple Ridge estates brought residents out of their homes like emerging butterflies. For the first time in years, people lingered in their front yards, chatting with passing neighbors without anxious glances over their shoulders. Children played freely, their laughter no longer hushed by parents fearful of noise complaints. I stood in my driveway beside my new motorcycle, watching this transformation with quiet satisfaction. The court-ordered restitution had allowed me to replace my destroyed bike with an even better model, though no vehicle could fully replace the sentimental value of the original. Still, the gleaming machine represented something powerful: justice served and a new beginning. "That is quite an upgrade, Sheriff," Frank called, walking over from his house with a friendly wave. "Planning another ride today?" "Not today," I replied. "Today is about something more important than riding." At my invitation, neighbors began gathering in the community center that afternoon. The same room that had witnessed Karen's victory celebration now hosted a different kind of meeting. Tables displayed architectural drawings and landscape designs. A large banner read "Maple Ridge Community Garden Project." The restitution money covered replacing my motorcycle with plenty left over, I explained to the assembled residents. "After discussing options with many of you, I am proposing we use the remaining funds to convert the unused lot at Elm and Maple into a community garden and gathering space." The proposal was met with enthusiastic approval. What had once been an empty field controlled by the HOA would become a shared space for growing vegetables, flowers, and community connections. More importantly, it would be managed by a rotating committee of volunteers rather than a permanent power structure. Over the following weekends, residents of all ages worked together transforming the space. Karen and the other former board members, as part of their community service, worked alongside everyone else. The initial awkwardness gradually gave way to tentative reconciliation as they performed honest labor for genuine community improvement. I observed Karen one Saturday afternoon, planting tomato seedlings with careful attention. "You have a good touch with those plants," I commented, approaching her work area. She looked up, surprise evident on her face. Without her makeup and designer clothes, working in simple gardening attire, she seemed like a different "Son, my grandmother taught me," she replied quietly. "Before the HOA, gardening was my real passion." "Perhaps that passion was misdirected into controlling others rather than nurturing growth," I suggested, not unkindly. She nodded slowly. "Power changes people. I never intended to become what I did." "Communities are like gardens," I told her. "They need guidance, not domination, support, not control." By midsummer, the garden bloomed with vegetables and flowers. The central gazebo hosted weekend gatherings, children's reading circles, and senior card games. The neighborhood had transformed from isolated houses ruled by fear to a genuine community connected by shared purpose. A voluntary community association replaced the defunct HOA, with transparent finances and term limits for all positions. The monthly dues were half what the HOA had charged, yet the neighborhood looked better than ever through genuine cooperative effort rather than punitive enforcement. My new motorcycle gleamed in the driveway, no longer a source of contention but a symbol of perseverance. Occasionally, neighbors would ask about it, and I would share stories from my years of service. What had once been viewed as an eyesore became a conversation starter and a reminder of the importance of standing firm against intimidation. On the one-year anniversary of moving into Maple Ridge, I hosted a barbecue in my backyard. Looking around at the gathered neighbors, now friends, I reflected on the journey. What had begun in conflict had transformed into something valuable. Sometimes protecting the law meant first being willing to defend liberty in your own backyard. As twilight settled over our reborn community, children played freely across adjoining yards with no arbitrary boundaries. Former adversaries shared meals and laughter, and I realized that in fighting for my rights, I had helped restore something precious too.